So we've spent the last couple weeks talking about doing first presentations and what that looks like. And Alec did a great job kind of taking the lead on that. And really the key of that first presentation slide deck is really to, go through, I think somewhere between 5 or 8 slides, do kind of a 30,000 foot flyover of what WealthWave is, what our mission is, a couple key financial concepts. And when we get to the end of that presentation, so I want to go in and do some resources here. So if I go to, let's see here, uh, Chrome, right, so I should be able to get into, are you guys seeing my Alpha Syndicate resources Google Drive pulled up? You're not seeing that. Okay.
No.
Wonder why that would be. Let me reshare it here. Share. How about now? You guys seen it now? All right. So one of these years, I'm going to figure out Google Drive and screen sharing on Zoom. Luckily, the business keeps paying me while I figure all this stuff out. So what I want to show here is this is our Alpha Syndicate resources page. And so, just to kind of segue from that one-on-one presentation, which is where you guys are going to view, that slide deck that a lot of us are using just to present kind of various concepts in the business. There's that page that's the end. I'm not going to pull it up here, but that basically that final page that we land on is consider your options. And it talks about you can become a client, you can become an associate with us part-time, or you can, I kind of talk about the third option is like basically be full-time. But I always kind of like say, hey, you can become a client, you can become a teammate, or you can become a referral source. That's my mentality going into doing these presentations. In fact, I want to take a step back because I was having a conversation with a teammate yesterday about this. So here's the power of that one-on-one presentation is it's all about this third-party referral approach. Okay. I'm in my 25th year of business. I've never felt comfortable calling somebody up and just directly saying, hey, I'm in the business of managing money for people, or we do financial services, or I'm a financial advisor, or whatever that phrasing would be. And I'm expanding my business. I'd love to see if I could review your portfolio and see about working together, whatever some advisors say out there. I'm not sure. But that's always felt very forward to me. It's always felt like I'm forcing my prospect to immediately make a decision on whether or not they're interested in meeting with me, interested in switching advisors, interested in having a detailed financial discussion with me, like all of these, kind of heavy decisions. And so, absent catching the right person at the right time, which is going to be a low percentage of calls, most people are going to be like, well, let me think about it, or can I get back to you, or let me talk to Janice, or it's going to be some version of punting, and or just a real easy card to play for a lot of people. Oh, you were already set. We have an advisor. And what I can tell you guys is for everybody that says, hey, we're set, we have an advisor, for everybody that says that, easily 50% of those people, if not more, aren't really solidified in that advisor, aren't totally sold out. It's not a comprehensive relationship. It's just somebody that they did some sort of business with at some point in the past. And it's an easy card to play, like I'm all set there, right? And so the third party referral approach is this, hey, I'd love to spend 15, 20 minutes with you. I want to show you a couple of key concepts of what I'm doing for people in my business. I'm not sure if any of it is up your alley or not, but I'm looking to build my business through referrals and relationships, people really much like yourself. And I would personalize that a bit, people that are, heavily involved in this or that or whatever. And, could I get 20 minutes of your time just to show you some of these concepts? And if there's anybody that you bump into that might benefit from what I'm doing, I'd love that introduction. And virtually 100% of people are going to say yes to that. So now we do the slide deck. We go through the presentation that Alec did a couple of times ago. And why I'm kind of picking up at this level to get into the info gathering is while I'm doing that presentation, there's two things I want to cover. So the first thing is There's great power in practicing that presentation on your own again and again and again. And there's great power in just doing that presentation, because practice, if it doesn't make perfect, it's certainly going to massively enhance your ability to deliver an effective presentation. But there's a terminal level of skill that you get to at that first presentation. In other words, just to make something up, let's just say I'll use a name. Let's say James Schwartz is the best presenter in the history of WealthWave. Well, like, you can put him in front of the wrong prospect, or a prospect that's not ready to do anything, and he's not going to get any different result than you're going to get, right? So at some point, like, once you get pretty good at that presentation, you're either going to get a result or you're not. So the real power is if you get very comfortable with that presentation. What it's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to kind of go through some key concepts, have some fluidity to what you're describing, but you're going to be able to pay attention to your prospect the whole time. Because what I want to do is I'm covering different things in the presentations. I want to pay attention to, did I pique their interest at one of these concepts? Do they kind of shift in their chair a little bit? Do they look like they're getting bored? Does one spouse look like they're kind of checked out of this and wondering why they're here? All of these little intangible kind of social cues I want to kind of pay attention to. And I'm making little mental notes as I go. And we're going to talk a lot about this as we talk about gathering info today, because it's going to be on this times a factor of 10. But the idea is I'm going to pick up on those clues because it gives me an indication. And then sometimes just the conversation itself will surface some potential hot buttons. Like, I think you can generally, in a half-hour discussion and asking people about what they do, I think you can generally figure out if they're happy doing what they're doing or they're not. They're committed to doing it or they're not. You can generally, I think, gather if somebody feels confident about their finances or if they're really not. And so those are some of the intangible things that will take your ability to convert a prospect to a client or a recruit to the next level. So we get to the end of that page, and what happens is I'm on that consider your options page. You can become a client, you can be a part-time associate or a full-time business owner with us. And I'm going to basically say some version of this question. I'm going to say, hey, Roger, we're kind of at the end here. It's been great to spend a little bit of time with you. I do appreciate it. I'm just curious, is there anything that I've said here today that's intrigued you to a point where you might want to talk about that a little bit further? And so that's kind of like a default question that I'm going to land on at the end. Now, based on the nature of that actual presentation, that I might personalize that a bit more, if they've shown some interest in one area or not. And I don't have the stats to prove it to you, but I'm just going to anecdotally tell you that, where I really launched my business, my first 3-4 years in business, I had just hundreds and hundreds of appointments at coffee shops and Panera Bread lunches, and then I got my office opened up in that office, and I was on a mission my first couple of years in business as I was ramping this up from nothing to I got in front of anybody I could. If you were a human being in my ecosphere, I figured out a way to get in front of you, have some sort of conversation with you. And candidly, that led to some awkward conversations, right? I mean, it just did. I mean, because I was just going for it. I was just, I wasn't ruling anybody out at that point in time. But I would tell you roughly half of the time, I would get to this point in that conversation, and we could be over a meal. And sometimes I would just be like, and these days I didn't have like this on a PowerPoint. It was, I had a book and I printed some of these pages out, and it was kind of like I would flip through the pages, in paper format, like through a binder. Sometimes I would just, as I got better at this, especially if we were over a meal, I would just talk verbally through some concepts, or I might sketch the rule of 72 out on a napkin or a piece of paper, that kind of thing. And so the more comfortable you go with these concepts, the more you can kind of, use some latitude with how you present them. But I'd get to the end of it, I'd say, hey, Roger, I'm just curious, is there anything I've shared here today that's intrigued you enough to want to maybe talk a little bit further about it or interest you on a personal basis? And roughly half the time they would dismiss it and say, hey, I think we're all set. I really appreciate it. I mean, this sounds awesome, Tyson. I'll keep you in mind, some version of that. Or it'd be like, yeah, we've got a guy, I've had an advisor for 25 years. He's, went to college with a guy, whatever, like, clearly locked in, dialed in, not open to doing business, no problem. And candidly, some of those people did give me referrals. I don't know if it was a huge number. I certainly didn't I wouldn't attribute the growth of my business to the referrals that people that didn't do business with me gave me, although there were some. But probably half of the time, the person would basically say, we've been thinking about this forever, or we really need to get a college fund started, or we just had a grandchild, or we're probably short on life insurance. I mean, guys, when people feel comfortable talking to you because your approach has been very casual and it's not been aggressive, it's not been salesy, you're not trying to corner them into, buying something from you. When you fulfill your promise, in other words, if I set up the meeting to basically, hey, I want to spend 15, 20, 25 minutes with you and show you some concepts and for the purpose of, maybe you can introduce me to some people, I'm going to keep that promise. I'm not going to turn it into an hour presentation. I'm not going to come at them hard from a sales angle. I thought this was just about, show me what you do. That's where you erode trust. So you build trust, you build comfortability. People feel just conversational and comfortable with you, and people drop their guard. When they know that the purpose of the meeting isn't to corner them into making a purchasing decision or a transactional decision, people kind of drop their guard and they listen to you more. So there's a lot of psychological elements to doing a proper third-party referral approach. And then that first presentation, and we're going to keep circling back at that because this is the key skill to learn, as you're going. So now, how do we transition? So half the time people say, you know what, we do need to do X, or we do need to look at Y a little bit more. Hey, awesome. I'm really enthusiastic about working with you guys. I'd love to meet Cindy, maybe if I'm just meeting with the husband. And anyways, what happens then is we get to the point where I'm now setting up the first presentation. So here's what I want to do, and this is really important. The first presentation or the first meeting in the office where I'm collecting info is more than likely going to be a separate meeting. Okay, so there might be a condition if it's just a really smooth meeting or whatever. If they're ready to go, I'm always going to be prepared to have this info gathering form that I'm about to go through with you. And so I might say, well, I'll tell you what, if you got an extra couple minutes, I'd love to start jotting down some notes of where you're at. And so I'd be ready for that. But what I really want to do, because usually this first presentation is just with one person, it's less likely that the first presentation is with two spouses or both spouses of a family. So if it is, I definitely might want to parlay into that. But I really want to collect info with both spouses, if at all possible. And I want to fight for that. And it's really tempting to skip over that step. It's really tempting to I can do it quicker with just you. Or, well, man, my husband's always busy, or my wife's always running around, or with kids, it's a harder step. But you guys getting both spouses involved at the beginning will eventually help you get a lot more business done. And it might even be the difference of getting business done or not. Okay. So I'm probably going to set a separate time. And here's how I'm going to do that. I want to try, if I'm local, if I'm around Toledo, I want to set that meeting in the office in a professional environment, if at all possible. I don't want to do it at their house. And I'm going to fight for that, guys. And I'm just telling you guys, even if somebody lives a half hour, 45 minutes away from here, I bet they have a doctor they come see somewhere in this area. I bet they have a dentist they come see twice a year. I bet they have some sort of professional relationships in their life that bring them into our area. And guys, I think it's a big deal. There's a reason why we spent the money on this facility. There's also a reason why we made it very accessible. This is a super accessible location from any part of town you're coming from or outside the area, right off the highway. Is because it's going to be a different meeting in a professional environment. It's going to be different than if you're in their kitchen or meeting at a restaurant somewhere. It just is. Okay. It's going to give you more leverage. It's going to give you a higher level of credibility. They're going to walk in and there's going to be more concentration on the meeting There's no distractions. So there's magic to that. There really is. And it's more professional. Again, people that sell things show up to my house. I got people knocking on my door constantly, especially in the summer, with all sorts of home services and you name it. Those that's what salesmen do. Okay. But advisors, professionals, doctors, fiduciaries, lawyers, they meet in offices. Okay. So I can't stress that enough with both spouses. So now we set that up. I've made it a point. We've coordinated our time. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them back in. And in this folder over here, I'm going to go to this fact finder right here. And this is going to be, if someone give me a thumbs up, then switch to the fact finder here on the screen. This is going to be the primary document I use when I'm gathering. And I haven't really changed this in, gosh, a couple of decades. And so almost everything on this fact finder is going to be information I want to gather. Okay. And we're going to go through this as much as we can today and maybe finish up a bit next week. What I might do today is I might do kind of a flyover of a couple of key things, and then we can dig a little bit deeper next week. But I don't, as I'm thinking out loud, I don't want to just do like the first page or two and then try to pick that up. It's just, there wouldn't be any continuity to that. But let me just say this. So my litmus test on the fact finder, I consider this the most important part of the client process by far. I would even tell you this is like 80% of the client process. I think the remaining 20% is mostly like educating them on your actual solutions. And the final 5% is kind of some, random nuance and closing and answering some final questions. But if you can set up a client case properly, everything else is going to be downhill skiing from there in the client process. And I actually think that most of the field in our company and our industry does this backwards. And just from experience I've seen, what most people do in our industry, and I see it a lot in our company, is they will race through the fact finding stage because they just consider it a means to an end. So they'll either email the fact finder to a client, hey, fill this out and get it back to me, or they'll roughshod run through it. And then they think the closing is what comes at the end when you're presenting the client the product and you're talking about how amazing the product is. Look at this feature, look at this guarantee, look at that bell and whistle, look at this income it produces, look at this illustration. And they try to sell products based on features and benefits of the product. And at that point, you might as well be selling a car or a copier or software. Like you're just in product sales at that point. I don't want to be in product sales. I want to be in consultant driven, fiduciary, advice giving solutions. Okay. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the fact finding. This is the entire first visit. I might spend 20, 30 minutes gathering information because just like I said in the presentation, I'm not just asking questions and filling out a form. I'm looking for all of the emotional and intangible things behind this information. So number one, I'm going to be very thorough. And so my litmus test for this, to come back to that idea, is if one of you fills out a fact finder, and I've been on the receiving end of this for years. Ryan's a perfect example. We'll talk about Ryan behind his back since he's not on the call today. So because Ryan's in Dayton, by nature, I'm not really involved in most of his presentations, although we've had, errors where I was. So what Ryan would do years ago is he would email me like a copy. He'd scan his fact finder and send it to me. And I look at it and there'd be like a couple squiggles of ink on page 1, a couple basics on page 2. It just would be very incomplete. And there would just be a lot of holes in it. And I'd be like, well, I see balances here, but what are the interest rates and what are the payments? And it would lead me to all sorts of questions. And so I kind of developed this idea of the litmus test is somebody should be able to send me a fact finder. And if you and I didn't have a conversation, if all you did is email it to me and say, hey, take a look at this, let me know what you think. And if I wasn't in the presentation and you and I didn't have a conversation about it, that thing should be thorough enough where I should have a pretty good view of who this person is. I should know what their goals are. I should see all the aspects of their finances, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses. And I should be able to take that and develop a list of recommendations just on that. So this is a good discipline for you to get involved in. And this does a couple things. Number one, the more thorough you are on collecting info, um, that's going to set a standard from a optics and a professionalism standard that people are going to trust and have more credibility in you. You know, I feel a lot better when I meet with a doctor that takes his time. You guys have all been in a doctor's appointment where the doctor's running behind, he's in a rush, can't get out of there fast enough, can't turn over to the nurse fast enough, right? And how do you feel at the end of that? Like, is that confidence building or not? But in a lot of cases, we don't have choices on that. We don't have choices in some of our providers because of health insurance or conditions we have or whatever the case is. But you all have also probably been on the receiving end of doctor appointments where, hey, clearly this guy is going to sit here and let me get through all my questions, and he's not in a rush, and he's looking at me in the eyes. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's just a very different feeling. And I'm just telling you, this is the power of this first presentation. So when I say closing happens in the first presentation, it's because people, whether they realize it or not, are going to decide to buy you or sell you, not only in the first meeting, but probably in the first 10 minutes of the meeting. I actually heard something fascinating yesterday. I was listening to a podcast on Sirius XM. I had some time in the car, and I'd never heard this before. I found it fascinating. This person did a study on doctors and tone of voice. And they did this clinical study. The hypothesis was, do people trust you more based on your tone of voice or trust you less based on your tone of voice? Like how impactful is something just like tone of voice in trust? And the way they did it was fascinating. They had all these different doctors record a 10-second like script that basically said, hi, my name's Tyson Moore. I'm an internist specialist. I work at Toledo Hospital, something like that. It'd be like name, what kind of doctor they were, where they were. And what they did though is they did this huge sample size, but they took all those recordings and they digitized them and they warbled up the words so you couldn't actually understand any of the words in English. And they played a couple of copies of it. All you could hear was the pace at which they talked, the tone, and just kind of like that was the whole thing. And here's what they found out. They found out that they'd had the scoring system, and people that had better tone of voice, that were more upbeat, positive, and just welcoming, had disproportionately fewer, patient complaints and, liability issues than people that scored lower on that. And it was profound. And I'm like, I'm like, of course that's correct, right? And so how true of that would be in our meeting? So back to this idea of if you're in this area, meet in our office, because that's part of the tone, that's part of the environment. It sets the stage before you even say anything. You walk in, you get a coffee, you get a water, you're welcome. It's okay. This is a real professional business. Clearly, this, something's happening here. And then you sit down and you're dressed appropriately. I actually think you can be overdressed. I think if I wore a suit and tie, which I shudder to think having to do that every day, that feels too stuffy and salesy to me. Like I'm putting on a front. So I dress nice, but I'm in kind of always like golf attire, dress button downs, polos, quarter zips. It's kind of this like I'm dressed up, but I'm comfortable, I'm casual, and then you sit down and I'm creating this comfort. I'm making it easier for people to settle in and have a conversation with me. I want this first presentation, not only when I'm presenting to the prospect, but also collecting information. I don't want it to feel like an interview. I want it to feel like a conversation, like it's going both ways, even though I'm directing all of it. And so there's a lot, confidence. If I'm making a lot of eye contact, that's going to convey confidence. Okay. If I'm looking up, I'm looking down, I'm nervous, right? That's gonna take away confidence. Okay, so all these things add up to somebody psychologically, subconsciously deciding, yeah, we like this guy, or I don't know about that guy, right? And so they're going to make that decision. And the power of this, guys, is once somebody kind of makes that decision to buy you, they're going to drop their guard and listen to you the rest of that meeting and in subsequent meetings. if somebody's got their guard up and skepticism, like, I don't know about this guy, like he's talking over my head, he's just seems to be in a rush, or just only talk to the husband. He did, if the wife's thinking, man, he didn't barely even look at me or acknowledge me in that meeting, like all these little mistakes that could be made. They'd be like, I just don't know about this guy. They're gonna have their guard up the whole time. And that's when you get the emails or the texts like, hey, sorry, we can't, can we reschedule? Or hey, we're busy this week. We'll get back with you with the time. They might not tell you no, but they might just put you off until hopefully you eventually like stop calling them. And we've all been on the receiving end of that, right? So this is all the intangibles of collecting info. But I want to be thorough. Okay. So I'm going to go through this. Obviously this is, some of this is obvious and basics, but all communication, I want cell phones and emails and, kids and date of births. And I want to spend some time on goals and dreams. So I just know going into this, sometimes people are like ready to go, like they're ready for this process. They want to, go through their finances. They want to get advice. Sometimes people are a little unsure. Maybe they've never met with an advisor before. Maybe they're a little embarrassed or ashamed of where they're at financially, and they feel judged, or they're just it's uncomfortable. Like there's all these emotions that can be happening, right? So why I start on goals and dreams is before I just launch into like, how much do you make in a year and how much do you have saved, like questions. Hey, let's just talk about what are your big goals long term. And I want to get beyond the retirement and help our kids with college. Like that's surface level. Okay, well, let's talk about retirement. What does that look like for you guys? Like, what would you guys do? What's important to you? Where would you live? And you get them talking about things, right? You get them talking about their kids, and you start filling in as much detail there as you can. But I want short-term goals. I want long-term goals with great specificity. I want to define this financial independence goal, because sometimes retirement means different things to different people. But let's talk about financial freedom. That's our end goal. We're all about freedom here. I mean, literally, my poster you can't see on this call, but it says it's not about money, it's about freedom. Like that's the whole kind of mantra of this office of WealthWave. Is this? I think there's something freeing about like being on a surfboard and being in the ocean water, right? You're separate from everything else, and I think that's the idea of financial freedom, right? So you can continue working or not, but how much money would it cost you to live the life you want to live, including some things you want to do? Let's put a number on that. Let's dream a little bit. And now you get people primed up, dreaming, thinking a little bit bigger. And then your job is to figure out how to get them there. And I'll tell them that. And then by this point, usually people are really a lot more comfortable and ready to go through all this. So I want to collect all of their sources of income. I want their employers, what they do. That's important because I can't tell you how many times I forget exactly where a client works. I know generally what they do, but I forget what hospital they work at or what school they teach at or whatever is relevant there. But I want all sources of income. If there's a pension coming in, or Social Security, I want their future Social Security. If they have any kind of future pension, I want to write down those notes of, kind of what they're expecting by what age. And of course, I'll collect more of those statements, things like that. But I want to get a full breakdown of income as detailed as I possibly can. As we move through debts, I want to fill every line out here, right? I want, how much is their house worth? How many years left do they have on their mortgage? What's their balance? What's their interest rate? What's their payment? And what are they actually paying? Oftentimes people might have a payment of $1,700, but they pay $2,000 a month on it or something. Like I might find maybe there's some extra money there on a cash flow basis. But I want to get details on all this stuff. I need to know how many years left they have on their mortgage. I need to know exactly what their interest rate is. Sometimes they need to look it up and get back to me. Same thing with all of their debts. Like I can't give advice unless I know specifics on, what their balances are, what their interest rates are, those kind of things. When it comes to life insurance, again, I want to know every detail possible. I want to know total death benefit. What's the carrier? If it's term, how many more years is it good for? When did you purchase the policy? What's the premium on it? I want every line in here should be filled for every policy they have. And if they have more than 2 policies, I scribble some down here or whatnot. It's one of the many reasons I do this on a handwritten note, right? It's more personal. If I'm trying to input on a laptop in front of somebody, that's very unpersonal, that's very sterile, that's very doctor's office-ish. And then I don't have as much latitude to scribble something on the back of a piece of paper or add notes somewhere. But I want to get all this life insurance. But as I'm going through this, I'm not just, and this is a great page to talk about this, I'm not just collecting the data. I'm doing two additional things. Number one, I'm watching their tone and their countenance as they give me the information. I want to see, like, does somebody feel really ashamed of their debt? Or are they reluctant to tell me their debt? Are they on top of their debt? Like, are they on top of, like what the details are? And yeah, we almost have that paid off and then we're going to pay this off, or what? Or are they kind of foggy? Like, I don't know, it's about $4,000. And I mean, the interest rate's like, I don't know, it's high. I don't know what it is. Hey, that's a big clue to how detail oriented this prospect is, right? Same thing about life insurance. Do they give me the life insurance in a tone that's like they feel confident about having that coverage? Or do they kind of feel like, I only have like 200,000, or I only have something through work? Do they feel kind of like, I know I'm low on this? Like, that's really valuable intel. But then on top of that, I'm going to ask them about some of those things. So if we're going through debts and I see some stuff, I might say, okay, I'm just curious, how important is it for you to get this paid off or that paid off? Or talk to me about these student loans. Is there any forgiveness coming down the road? Or, the more I can engage and talk about the details of these financial instruments, the more I'm going to get a sense of what their priorities are and what we need to do. I want to kind of feel them out on life insurance. They're going to tell me a number. Most people have something through work, and most people have an additional something from somewhere. But the vast majority of prospects I meet with are underinsured, and often to a great extent. And I'm gonna kind of plant a little seed as I go. So what I don't want to do is collect life insurance, but like, okay, great, thanks. And then come back in the next meeting and out of nowhere say, well, I think you need an extra $1 million of life insurance. Like, they're just not prepped for that. I need to grease the skids a little bit here, right? So I might say things like, well, okay, you got something through work, that's great. And I see you have this other policy. I'm just curious, do you feel like this is enough coverage? And I want to see how they answer that. And usually people say, well, they might say, yeah, I mean, generally enough, gosh, if something happened to me, Susie's got this, and that, and whatever. And so that's a little clue. Okay, if I feel like he's underinsured, but he doesn't feel like he's underinsured, I might need to do some education on the next visit about how much insurance somebody actually needs before I just launch into my recommendation. Or if he comes back and says, I don't know, like, it's probably not enough. I mean, curious what you think. Hey, that's a massive green light. I've got somebody that's really interested in what I'm going to come back with. So all of this little subtle intel is key to how I'm going to come in on the next visit, right? So now we get into assets. Same mentality. I want the account balances, how much is going in every month. Rate of return, I kind of is a little bit more of a guesstimation, other than if it's like a fixed account, like a CD, a savings account, bond fund, you name it, like something like that. But I don't need like a specific number on rate of return of their 401k that's moving every day. But the idea would be, I want to get as detailed as possible. If it's qualified plan down here, what are you getting matched on? And I think we have deferred spelled wrong there. But what are you getting matched on? And is there profit sharing going in? Like, all the details on that form or on that plan is really important. Because again, I'm going to look for, is somebody overfunding their 401k? Should they be doing Roth instead of pre-tax? Is there money that's not getting matched that maybe we can put somewhere else? So this is all little things I'm gathering. Okay. We get into college plans and any cash value life insurance up here. I want to ask if they have a will and a trust, just to see what's in place, what other professionals are there. And again, if somebody's got young kids, we might talk about, the importance of having a trust from a legacy standpoint. If there's a certain estate size, we'll talk about that. But then we get to the big 5 questions. These questions are huge. I haven't changed these questions in 20 years. And these are critical to getting detailed answers on, because this is going to set the stage for everything that's going to come after this in the process. Okay. So the first question, how much are you willing to save per month towards your goals? I love this question because this is a great little kind of Rorschach test on who my prospect is. So if my prospect is obviously good at saving money and has assets and gives me a number that seems in line with what they can do, what their incomes are, I'm gonna be like, great. But I see a lot of things on both ends of the spectrum. Sometimes I see people that make great incomes and should have some pretty decent discretionary income that'll give me like a really low ball number, like I don't know, like a couple $100, right? And that's an indication that okay, maybe there's either other expenses happening that I'm not catching here, or they just don't feel they're not super committed in this process yet. They're just kind of putting their toe in the water. And I'm making a mental note, okay, there's some work to do to figure out why they're just telling me they should be able to save $1,000 a month, but they're telling me 200. I got a little work to do to figure out why that is. And then sometimes on the other end of the spectrum, I got somebody that, doesn't have a huge income and doesn't have much in the bank, has some credit card debt, and they're saying, I can save like $500-700 a month. And my first thought is going to be like the new agent me was like, awesome, I got somebody willing to save $500 a month. But now in for a long time, I've been like, okay, but where's that coming from? Sometimes people are just super excited to kind of like go through a process and start getting their finances on track, and they're just feeling really enthusiastic, but they're under calculating how much free cash flow they actually have. And so I again might need to do some work there. Well, that's awesome. $500 a month. Wow. I'm just curious, where do you think we can pull that from? Because I'm just seeing that there's really nothing in the bank right now. It seems like all the money that's coming in every month is going out. And I'm just going to kind of get them talking and see where that conversation goes. I'm going to gather a lot of intel along the way, but I don't want to build a plan based on an unrealistic number. That said, I want to push people to save more than they're probably naturally comfortable doing. So it's kind of that tension between those two things. Is there an account or policy that you're not open to new ideas on? This is where I'm going to flesh out. Are there other professionals involved? Is there a life insurance agent? Is there an Edward Jones guy? Is there your dad's advisor? Is there somebody else that's going to be a gatekeeper that I need to figure out? Are they gonna get in the way of what we're doing or not? Or or they'd be like, I have this account, but we're not married to the guy. He hasn't called us in years. Like again, I'm picking up a lot of intel there. I'm going to come back to. This question is important, especially for younger people and or older people. But is there anyone else that helps you make financial decisions that we should include in this process? So often, a single person or a newly married couple might rely on a parent for advice, or somebody else, or my uncle's a CPA, or that kind of thing. And I just want to know who that person is that we might want to involve up front in the process. And if somebody's older, maybe their adult children are helping them with some decisions. And I've got some clients that fit that paradigm as well. And then here, the last two are super important. If I come back with a plan that is better than what you're currently doing in every way, is there any reason why we couldn't move forward with the plans that I bring about? In other words, I'm going to get this is kind of like a pre-close commitment. Like, hey, and sometimes I'm going to personalize it. So if I come back and say, based on the conversation we've had, if I come in there and say, hey, if I can come back with a plan where we can get some of those debts paid off that we talked about, but also increase your savings for the long term, and it doesn't change your lifestyle a whole lot, we're just kind of reorganizing some things, is there any reason why we couldn't move forward on implementing those plans? And people will be like, I can't see why. In other words, if I come back and deliver a solution for what you're telling me are your biggest goals, and I can show you how to get there, is there any reason why we can't work together? If they say, well, I'm not sure, it kind of depends on what you come up with, I'm going to make a little note that I might have some trust issues that I need to keep working on. Like I need to keep building trust here, because they still have some skepticism up. Like they're still judging everything I'm going to come in at with like, well, it kind of depends what you recommend, right? That's a clue for me. If they come back and say, well, yeah, I mean, if you can help us like figure out how to do this and that, like I can't see why we would do it. Now I have a commitment to come back to in meetings, 2 and 3. If things start getting off track, or I've presented everything and they're like, well, we need to think about it, then I can refer back to this. I'm like, okay, I totally understand that. I know these feel like big decisions. I'm just curious because I'm thinking back to our first meeting when I asked you if I could come back with a way of shoring up this debt pay down and getting some more savings and getting a better rate of return on this account over here. You said we could work together, and I'm just curious, do you feel like I've not done that? And see, now I have something to go back to and kind of talk through that. And often that just can unlock some things, and people are like, well, I mean, I guess you're right. Because I've made a living out of getting people sitting on the fence and getting them to get off the fence and take action, right? And so setting up this on the front end is so critical in that process. And that's a key question to do that. And then the last thing I want to cover here before we pause and open up to questions is, when can we meet next week to continue this process? And so, guys, that's so critical. If we don't, I never leave a client meeting without the next meeting set, ever. Never, ever, ever, not ever, ever, ever. And I see so many people do that because they'll try to do it, and then the prospect will be like, well, I don't know, we don't have the soccer schedule for next week, or I don't have my work schedule, or this. I mean, it's some legitimate reason, but they're like, okay, I get it. Well, I'll tell you what, once you get your schedule, let's touch base. I mean, you're back into prospect mode now. Now you're going to chase that guy around for 2 or 3 weeks just to get it back in, and you've lost all your momentum. So the minimum I'll settle for is, number one, I want to meet within a week, because if we meet beyond a week, we're just going to have to re-review everything again, and we've lost all of our momentum and continuity. But number two, I want to, it's a test of commitment. It's a test of how interested are these people, how serious are these people. But the last thing is, the minimum I'm going to settle for is, if there's a little unknown in the calendar, or usually Tuesdays work, but I'm not sure about next Tuesday, something like that. The minimum I'm gonna accept is, I'll tell you what, why don't we set it up for Tuesday at 6:30, and I'm just gonna plan on that. If for any reason we need to move that around a little bit, call me on Monday. I've got a little bit of latitude next week, but now I have something on the calendar, something that they have to call me again to move it. That's a way different place to be in, as opposed to like, well, call me on Monday and then let's figure out a time. It's just it's a total different place to be. And I want to fight for, everybody's busy. Everybody, I mean, if I've said this before, if I was a client of me, like, I'd be trying to get me and Leah at the same place at the same time is virtually impossible at this point in our life. And so the idea would be like, you better lock me down while you got me, right? And so I want to keep that continuity. And you guys, the most successful, is the last thing I'll say here, the most successful advisors in any firm in our industry all have a process. The most successful doctors have a process. The most successful professionals at any level, they have a process of taking new patients on, or new prospects on, and converting them to clients. And so if your process is up for amendment every time you do it, based on who you're talking to, you're never going to build trust or credibility, right? But what I want to do is, I want to say, hey, I've got a process. I've been working with clients for 25 years now. If you're 6 months in the business, you could say, hey, our team, our firm, we've got a process that we stick to very seriously, because we've found it leads to better client outcomes. And what I want to do is, I want to spend 3 visits with you starting tonight, and I kind of walk through that, which we can get to. But I lay out the process, and people buy that. That's a big part of building trust and credibility. Is there's a process here, right? And and people are like, okay, there's a method here, and then you always have something to fall back to. So, anyways, I know I kind of went through a lot there. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or things they'd like to add as part of this conversation here?
I would
Yeah.
love to. David, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted to interject and say that those questions are magical. That has helped me build the business up to where I have it. I've been using those questions for the last 13 years. And one question I wanted to highlight is, usually the answer is no from a client, where if you ask, are there any policies or accounts that you're not open to new ideas on? Usually the client, in my experience, has said no. But in one case, I had a lady that said yes, and she went on for 5 minutes to talk to me about her $25,000 whole life policy that her mom had purchased for her. And she promised her mother she would never get rid of it. And there was like a deep connection there. And I said, we are absolutely keeping that policy. I took that off the table. Like, we're not even going to consider that. You're absolutely going to keep that policy. And that opened up. You could just physically see her relax after I answered that question. And I was able to pick up 120,000 from that client just by not trying to go for a $25,000 whole life policy. So just wanted to mention that.
Alec, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I wanted to, specify and let the team know. I think the big difference in my business a year and a half ago from now is, Tyson kept telling me, the difference between, where I was at and where I could be was 1% difference. Just asking one extra question, getting a crystal clear answer as opposed to something vague. This training was incredibly helpful. I would tell you, if you're not the one doing all of the meetings on your own, either get Tyson involved or someone involved that's able to, or watch this training about 400 times. If you can replicate everything that Tyson just said, if you get in front of somebody, probably 8 out of 10 times you're going to get business, or you're going to make a really, really solid impression. But this, I think, is what allowed for me to pick up so much business last year, so much this year, and have a lot more momentum in the realm of referrals, as opposed to just getting in front of someone, for the first time and kind of grunting it the whole way, is because I was so clear on what I was going to ask somebody. And before I even sat down with someone, I knew for a fact I didn't have something to sell them, but my process was going to sell it, sell me. And by asking all these questions and just being able to uh, very passively and unconsciously fill out this info, but very consciously pay attention to body language, that is what I think has been the difference maker in my business recently. But you got to start with asking these questions. So everything that was talked about today, I think, is incredibly helpful. And the last thing I'll say too is, I remember early on in business, as I was kind of getting away from, Tyson running a meeting and me being the one driving the meeting. Every single time that a client didn't do business, Tyson would say, well, like, did you collect this info? Did you get this? Did you get this? And when I'd say no, he'd smile at me and be like, well, that's probably why they're not doing business. And so as I've gotten more comfortable with, you can ask these questions, but there's so much more to know. Once you can get a lot better at that, that's when stuff really starts to take off for you.
Yeah, and just to echo what Alec's saying, I mean, just what I've observed about Alec and the transition he's made in the past year. And I'd say the same thing about Ryan. Ryan in the past, maybe he was 6 months ahead of Alec or something, because I've seen this in maybe for about 18 months out of Ryan. But there's a different presence when talking with them or seeing them, hearing them present, or being involved in meeting. There's this quiet confidence. And I think what that's coming from is, I think, to stay on Alec here, I think Alec's gotten so comfortable with what he's doing next, and kind of how he's going to run this meeting. And he's very comfortable with presenting whatever he's presenting, that he just doesn't have to, like, it just doesn't feel so mechanical and rehearsed. And it's coming across like, I remember thinking, like, I mean, I got this advice early in my career, where it's like, you have to, like nobody wants to be your biggest client. My biggest clients don't know they're my biggest clients. And I think that's healthy. I think you need to act like you manage $100 million, and you need to act like you look at $400,000 or $500,000 accounts every single day, all day long. Like, if I walk into my doctor's office with some sort of, like, issue, I want him to act like he's seen this 500 times before and knows exactly what to do. And I know exactly who to send you to. I know exactly what tests we need to perform. I know exactly what we need to look for. That's building confidence. Okay. And so the irony of this is, usually newer agents are a little nervous because they are a little unsure and they want to do a really good job. But that nervousness comes across as like, lack of confidence, and maybe this person isn't being fully truthful with me, or I don't know if this person like I don't want to be, nobody wants to be somebody's biggest client, nobody wants to be somebody's guinea pig client, right? That's why our matchup field training process is so valuable, because there's always going to be a senior advisor involved in the meeting, and the junior advisor is learning, and eventually the junior advisor becomes a senior advisor. And yes, that's how we're going to build out this organization. Is we need more field trainers. Like there's no client I wouldn't put in front of Alec or Ryan at this point, to get a result. And hopefully, there's a 3, 4, 5 more people to add to that list in the next year, as like a field trainer. So we have more people to match up, more people to, sync up new recruits to. But, this takes a minute to learn, right? But just understand, like, this is one of the highest paying industries in the world. And our industry is full of people that make millions of dollars a year and people that make almost no money, right? And there's a huge spectrum there. And in the best of the industry are going to gather a disproportionate amount of all the clients, all the accounts, right? The most successful get more leads and more referrals and more clients, right? It's not an even dispersion. And so this is a skill that's worth investing in and learning and building comfortability with. And we'll keep talking about practicing and role playing it and working through things on your own. But that's why our field training process is so key. So anything else that anybody wants to add as we're wrapping up here?
Tyson, I just wanted to just clarify this. This is like the first full meeting. So that little kind of 15 to 20 minute, here's what I'm doing, is a totally different meeting, right? I mean, that's before this, right?
Yes, in most cases. So again, there's going to be some cases where that leads right into collecting this info based on the nature of the relationship. But I would tell you the vast majority, 90% of the time, that first presentation is going to be like to tee up scheduling this meeting in the office, or in your case, it would be via Zoom,
Right.
but with both spouses. And if for no other reason, I want to separate it so I can get the second spouse involved. And then I got buy-in. And let me just tell you that I can give you the long answer or the short answer to this, but the short answer is it's easier on the front end to not involve the other spouse, especially when the primary spouse says things like, well, I handle all the finances, I make all the decisions, blah, blah, blah. Well, let me just tell you, for everybody that says that, by the time it gets time to actually like making a decision, moving money around, buying a policy, like, the all of a sudden the dormant spouse like, no, wait a minute, what are you doing? No, we don't have money for that. And you're just nowhere at that point. You got to start all over. The whole thing is destroyed. So there's exceptions to every rule. But the vast majority of the time, you want to fight for both spouses. And sometimes I'll meet with both spouses, and in that first meeting, maybe let's just say the wife will look at me and be like, hey, thanks for, everything today. It's good to meet you. I just want you to know, like, David does everything. I trust him fully. Whatever he thinks we need to do is good with me. If I get that buy-in from the wife, like, okay, I'm good. David and I can work through everything else. Obviously, in most cases, we're going to need the wife to sign documents or whatever anyways, but I'm just telling you, it's all about getting that buy-in. And so setting up that separate time with both spouses, even if it means getting into next week before we meet or slowing things down a little bit, I'd rather it get done correctly versus quickly, because I want to get a better result. So hopefully this has added some value for you guys. And as Alex said, I would definitely go back and rewatch this. This is going to be a great training for you to go back to maybe in a month or two when all of a sudden you have a first visit lined up. And it's just a great refresher. Listen to this the day or two before that meeting as a refresher. And that's true of a lot of our trainings, by the way. That's why we built this on-demand library, and all that's available to you on the YouTube page that you guys all have access to. So anyway, appreciate spending some time with you guys. Appreciate everything you guys are doing. And we will see you next Tuesday.